The ballroom doors opened with a whisper of silk and secrets, but to Camila De Santos, it felt like stepping into a cage disguised as paradise. The gala sparkled with everything money could buy: crystal chandeliers dripping light like diamonds, champagne flowing in rivers of gold, laughter that sounded rehearsed rather than real. Her emerald gown hugged her figure perfectly, a gift from her father for her 23rd birthday. She had imagined this moment would feel magical, celebrating her family's legacy at the annual De Santos Foundation charity event in their sprawling Manhattan estate. But the moment she walked into that room, something deep inside Camila whispered that she was walking towards something else entirely. Something cold. Something wrong. She didn't want to believe it, not until a hand suddenly touched her elbow and a man in a charcoal suit leaned in close, his voice low and urgent as he whispered, "Your life is in danger. Pretend I'm your brother." If you believe that courage can come from the most unexpected places, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Camila froze. In that split second, the ballroom disappeared, the orchestra faded, the champagne glasses stopped clinking, and all she felt was her pulse thundering in her ears. The man beside her was someone she had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes like polished granite. His suit was expensive, tailored perfectly, but there was something dangerous underneath the elegance, something predatory. His presence alone should have terrified her, but his eyes, sharp yet strangely protective, told her he wasn't there to harm her. He was there because something was terribly, unimaginably wrong. She didn't turn her head, but she felt him angle his body in front of her slightly, shielding her from the crowd as guests glanced their way with polite confusion. His arm wrapped around her shoulders with practiced ease, the gesture appearing brotherly, affectionate, normal. To everyone watching, they were siblings reunited. To Camila, every breath felt like walking a tightrope over flames. Camila had spent 3 months planning this gala with her father. The guest list had been scrutinized, the security vetted, the menu perfected. And yet, in this instant, everything she thought she knew cracked open like thin ice under heavy boots. As they moved slowly through the crowd together, the stranger stayed close, a silent wall between her and something she couldn't yet see. Camila wanted to scream, to pull away, to demand answers, but she forced herself to smile, to nod at guests, to play along because she felt this man's hand steadying her, guiding her, protecting her. "Pretend I'm your brother," the words kept echoing in her mind. Her older brother had died in a car accident when she was 15. 8 years later, no one had ever been able to fill that void. She had walked through life since then with a quiet, private ache, the only daughter of a powerful man, beautiful but lonely, protected but isolated. Yet somehow, next to this dangerous stranger, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years: safety. It was absurd, impossible, and yet it wrapped around her like armor. Everything began to shift inside her when she caught her father's face across the room. He stood near the bar, deep in conversation with men she didn't recognize, men in dark suits with hard eyes and harder eyes. Her father's expression was tight, worried, the same look he wore when business deals went wrong. Her stomach dropped. She had ignored things for months: the late-night phone calls her father took behind closed doors, the way he'd suddenly insisted she needed bodyguards, how he'd asked her, practically begged her not to travel alone anymore. She pushed it all aside because she thought he was just being overprotective, just being a father who had already lost one child. And now, standing in her own family's ballroom, she realized that protection had almost come too late. The stranger leaned in again, his breath warm against her ear, his voice barely audible over the string quartet. "Don't look around. Don't react. There are 6 men here tonight who were sent to take you." Camila felt her knees weaken. "They're not here to kill you," he continued, his tone grim and urgent. "They're here to kidnap you. Your father owes money to people who don't accept excuses. You're the payment." The room tilted. She tried to continue smiling, but her hands trembled, her chest tightened, and cold sweat formed along her spine. The stranger's grip on her shoulder tightened, not painfully, but grounding, real. "Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely steady. His jaw tensed. For a moment, she saw something flicker in those granite eyes. Not coldness, but something unexpected. Regret. "My name is Roberto Neves," he said quietly, each word precise and heavy. "And I'm the only person in this room who plans to keep you alive tonight." The music swelled, guests laughed, champagne sparkled under the lights. And Camila De Santos realized she was standing in the center of a trap disguised as a celebration with a mafia boss pretending to be family, because the truth would kill her faster than any bullet. She looked up at him, this powerful, dangerous man playing the role of something soft, and when his eyes met hers again, she saw it clearly now. He wasn't just protecting her. He was saving her from a fate he'd failed to prevent once before. "Stay close to me," Roberto said, his voice steady but urgent. "And whatever happens next, trust me like you would a brother, because tonight, that's exactly what I am." Roberto moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who owned every space he entered. "Camila," he said, his voice suddenly warmer, louder, performative. "It's been too long, Irma." "Sister." The Portuguese word rolled off his tongue naturally, affectionately, like he'd said it 1,000 times before. Guests turned, smiling with polite curiosity. A silver-haired woman in pearls approached them, her face lighting up with recognition, not of Camila and Roberto together, but of the story she'd apparently already been told. "Oh, how wonderful that your brother could finally make it," the woman gushed, squeezing Camila's hand. "Your father mentioned he'd been traveling for business. South America, wasn't it?" Camila's blood ran cold. Her father had prepared them. He'd planted the story before Roberto even arrived, which meant her father knew. He knew someone was coming for her. He knew she needed protection. And he'd said nothing to her. Roberto smiled, charming, disarming, the perfect long-lost brother. "It's been too long, Irma." "Sister." The Portuguese word rolled off his tongue naturally, affectionately, like he'd said it 1,000 times before. Guests turned away, but Camila knew the story had been set. The dance continued, and she was on the stage, whether she liked it or not. As the woman walked away, Camila's mind raced with questions, but Roberto's grip kept her moving forward, steering her toward the edge of the ballroom, away from the center, away from the crowd. "Smile," he murmured, his lips barely moving. She forced a laugh, the sound hollow in her own ears. "Good." His eyes scanned the room constantly, cataloging faces, positions, exits. "Now listen very carefully, and don't react to what I'm about to tell you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. 6 men entered this estate tonight with one objective: to take you. Not to kill you, though they will if necessary. They want you alive, breathing, terrified. Your leverage, Camila, human collateral to force your father's hand. The room tilted. She stumbled slightly, and Roberto caught her, studying her with practiced ease. "What did my father do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "He made promises he couldn't keep, borrowed money he couldn't repay, and when the bills came due, he offered the only thing of value he had left. Me." Roberto's jaw tightened. "You." Camilla's eyes swept across the ballroom with new clarity, and suddenly everything looked different. The waiter refilling champagne glasses near the terrace doors, his stance was wrong, too rigid, too alert. The photographer who'd been circling the room, his camera had been pointed at her far too often, tracking her movements rather than capturing candid moments. The security guard by the north entrance, she'd never seen him before tonight. "How many are yours?" she asked, barely breathing the words. "3. The rest belong to Duarte." "Who's Duarte?" Roberto's expression darkened. "Someone I once trusted. Someone who believes you belong to him now." A waiter approached with a tray of champagne. Roberto plucked 2 glasses smoothly, handing one to Camilla while his other hand never left the small of her back. The waiter's eyes lingered on her a fraction too long before moving away. "That one?" she whispered. "Yes." The fear that had been building in her chest transformed into something else, something sharper, colder. Anger. Her entire life had been choreographed by her father: private schools, charity galas, carefully curated social circles. She'd been raised like a thoroughbred, beautiful, obedient, valuable. And now she understood why. She wasn't his daughter. She was his asset. "The exits," Roberto said quietly, guiding her toward the French doors that led to the garden. "All monitored. The front gate? 2 of Duarte's men. The service entrance? Blocked. They're waiting for the right moment, when the fireworks start at midnight, when everyone's distracted, when the music is loudest." "How long do we have?" Roberto checked his watch, the gesture casual, unhurried. 23 minutes. 23 minutes until her life as she knew it ended. 23 minutes to decide whether to trust a mafia boss who claimed to be saving her, or trust the father who'd sold her without saying goodbye. She looked up at Roberto, this dangerous stranger who'd stepped into her nightmare, and made a choice that terrified her more than anything else that night. She chose to believe him. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. For the first time since he'd appeared beside her, Roberto smiled. Not the practiced charm he'd shown the guests, but something real, something almost proud. "We survive," he said. "Together." They moved toward the garden terrace, and Roberto positioned them near a marble column where they could see the entire ballroom but remained partially hidden from view. The music shifted, a waltz now, slow and elegant. Couples drifted onto the dance floor like ships finding their moorings. "Why are you doing this?" Camilla asked quietly, the question that had been burning in her mind since he first whispered those words. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Roberto was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant, seeing something, or someone, far beyond this ballroom. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Camilla's chest tighten. "I had a sister once, Isabella. She was 23, your age. Same dark hair, same way of holding herself, like she was stronger than the world gave her credit for." Camilla watched his face transform, not with the cold calculation she'd seen before, but with something raw and human. Grief. There was a territorial dispute, old grudges, new ambitions, the kind of violence that makes men forget they have souls. He paused, his jaw working. "They took her to send me a message, to prove they could reach me anywhere, hurt me however they wanted. Roberto, I had 48 hours to meet their demands. I was arrogant then, believed I was untouchable, believed I could negotiate, strategize, outmaneuver them." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I was wrong." The silence between them felt heavy, suffocating. "They sent her back in pieces," he said flatly, the words clinical, detached. the only way he could say them without breaking. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be smart. Be alive." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the truth burning in his eyes. "When I heard about your father's debt, when I learned Duarte planned to take you, I saw her. Isabella. Same age, same innocence, same future about to be stolen." "So this isn't business," Camila said softly. "This is me refusing to let history repeat itself." His hand tightened on her shoulder, protective, grounding. "You get to live, Camila. You get the ending my sister never had." Something shifted in Camila's chest. This man, this feared mafia boss, wasn't saving her out of strategy or politics. He was saving her because he'd failed once before, and that failure had carved a wound so deep it changed him forever. She was about to respond when two men in dark suits materialized near the terrace entrance. Roberto's men. She recognized the deference in their posture, the way they moved with purpose but without panic. One of them, tall, scarred, dangerous-looking, leaned close to Roberto, his voice barely audible over the music. "Boss, Duarte's here. Just arrived. South entrance. 4 men with him, maybe more in the vehicles." Camila felt the world tilt again. Roberto's entire body went rigid, his hand instinctively moving to the small of his back, where she now realized he carried a weapon. "Position?" Roberto asked, his voice transformed, no longer the grieving brother, but the commander. "Main ballroom. He's looking for her." Camila's breath caught. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd, and then she saw him. A man in an impeccable navy suit, standing near the grand staircase, his eyes methodically sweeping the room. He was handsome in a cruel way, sharp features, cold smile, the kind of man who knew his own power and wielded it like a blade. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and Duarte smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a polite smile. A hunter recognizing his prey. "He sees me," Camila whispered, fear flooding her veins. Roberto stepped in front of her, blocking Duarte's view, his presence a wall between her and danger. "Then the game just changed," he said quietly, "and we're out of time." The orchestra shifted into something darker, the melody taking on an ominous undertone that made Camila's skin prickle. Roberto guided her back toward the center of the ballroom, counterintuitive, dangerous, but deliberate. "Stay in the crowd," he murmured, "harder to take you cleanly if there are witnesses." Camila's heart hammered as they moved through clusters of guests, Roberto's hand never leaving her waist. She tried to focus on breathing, on appearing normal, on not screaming. Then she noticed them. 3 waiters pushing champagne carts from different directions, converging toward the center of the room where she and Roberto stood. The carts gleamed under the chandelier light, silver trays stacked with crystal flutes, white linen draped over the sides. But something was wrong. The bottles were arranged strangely, packed too tightly, necks angled in ways that didn't make any sense. And the waiters moved with military precision, their eyes scanning, calculating, coordinating. "Roberto," she breathed. "I see them." One of the violinists, a young woman in a black dress, drifted past them, her bow moving across the strings. As she turned, her hand brushed Roberto's, and something small and white transferred between them. A folded note. Roberto palmed it smoothly, unfolding it against Camila's back where no one could see. She felt his body go rigid as he read. "What does it say?" she whispered. "Midnight courtyard extraction. They're taking you out to the garden when the fireworks start." Camila's watch read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to half their brightness, transforming the ballroom from brilliant to shadowed. Guests murmured in confusion, some laughing nervously, assuming it was part of the entertainment. But Camila knew better now. She could see it all unfolding like a choreographed nightmare. The curtains near the terrace doors swayed despite the windows being closed. Someone was positioned behind them. The photographer had stopped taking pictures and was moving toward the exits, blocking them casually, professionally. The 3 champagne carts were now positioned in a triangle formation, with her and Roberto at the center. "They're boxing us in," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. Roberto's grip on her tightened, not painfully, but grounding, protective. His voice dropped to barely audible. "When I move, you move with me. Don't think, don't hesitate, stay behind me and run where I tell you to run. Understand?" She nodded, her whole body trembling. "Camila." He turned her to face him, his eyes fierce and absolutely certain. "I won't let them take you. I don't care what it costs. You hear me? They don't get you. Not tonight, not ever." Before she could respond, the nearest waiter, young, nervous, sweating despite the cool air, reached for something beneath the white linen on his cart. His hand emerged holding not a champagne bottle, a pistol. But his nerves betrayed him. The weapon caught on the fabric, and in his panic to free it, he jerked too hard. The entire tray tipped. Crystal glasses tumbled through the air, catching the dimmed light like falling stars. And beneath the shattering glass, something else hit the marble floor with a different sound entirely. Heavy, metallic, final, steel striking stone. Another gun, then another. The ballroom erupted into chaos as guests screamed and scattered, finally understanding that the danger wasn't coming. It was already here. And Camila stood frozen in the center of it all, watching the assassins drop their disguises and reach for their weapons, their eyes locked on her like predators who'd been starving for weeks. Roberto moved first. His hand closed around her wrist like iron. "Run." The first gunshot shattered the last illusion of safety. It cracked through the air like thunder, and suddenly the ballroom transformed from elegant celebration into a war zone. Guests screamed, diving beneath tables, scrambling toward exits that were already blocked. Crystal chandeliers swayed violently as bodies collided beneath them. Roberto yanked Camila hard to the right just as a bullet tore through the space where her head had been a heartbeat before. She felt the wind of it pass her ear, heard it punch into the wall behind her with a sickening thud. "Stay low," Roberto shouted, pulling her behind a massive marble pillar as 3 more shots rang out in rapid succession. He positioned himself between her and the ballroom, his body a human shield, broad shoulders blocking her completely from view. She pressed herself against the cold marble, gasping for air, her emerald dress torn at the hem, her carefully styled hair falling loose around her face. "How many?" she heard herself ask, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror flooding her veins. "Too many." Roberto's hand moved to the weapon at his back, drawing it with practiced ease. His eyes scanned the chaos with calculated precision. But not enough. 4 men in waiter uniforms advanced through the screaming crowd, weapons raised, focused entirely on their target. One of them, the nervous one who dropped the tray, pointed directly at Camila, shouting something in Portuguese she didn't understand. Roberto didn't hesitate. He stepped out from behind a pillar and fired 3 times. The sound was deafening, final. 2 of the men went down immediately. The third dove behind an overturned table. But the 4th kept coming, weapon trained on Camila, finger tightening on the trigger. Roberto threw himself in front of her. The bullet meant for her chest hit his shoulder instead, spinning him backward. Blood bloomed across his white shirt like a spreading rose, dark and terrible. "No!" Camila screamed, catching him as he staggered. But even wounded, even bleeding, Roberto didn't fall. His face contorted with pain, but his grip on his weapon never wavered. He fired again, once, twice, and the 4th man collapsed. "Move," Roberto growled through gritted teeth, his left arm hanging useless, blood dripping onto the marble. "We move now, or we die here." He pulled her toward the east corridor, away from the main exits where Duarte's men were positioned. They ran through chaos, past sobbing guests huddled in corners, past overturned champagne carts, past the violinist who'd passed the note, now crouched beneath the grand piano, eyes wide with terror. Camila's heels slipped on spilled champagne and something else. Blood, she realized with horror, but Roberto's grip kept her upright, kept her moving. More gunfire erupted behind them, shouting in Portuguese and English, the sound of reinforcements arriving, but whose? Roberto's men or Duarte's? They burst into the corridor and Roberto slammed his body against the wall, breathing hard, his face pale from blood loss. His shoulder was a mess of torn fabric and crimson, but his eyes were still sharp, still calculating their next move. Camila pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her fingers came away slick and warm. "You're hurt," she said, her voice breaking. "You need a hospital." "I need you alive," he cut her off, his voice fierce despite the pain. "That's all that matters." And in that moment, Camila understood with devastating clarity. He could have run, could have disappeared into the crowd and saved himself, could have let Duarte's men take her and walked away clean, his debt to Isabella's memory paid simply by trying. But he didn't. He'd taken a bullet meant for her, bled for her, stayed when survival meant leaving. Not as a mafia boss protecting an asset, but as a brother protecting his sister. "Why?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Roberto looked at her, and despite the pain, despite the blood, he smiled, sad and real and absolutely certain. "Because this time, I don't let my sister die." They made it to her father's office on the second floor, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather that had always smelled like cigars and old money. Roberto locked the door behind them, shoving a heavy desk chair beneath the handle for extra security. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they regroup." He winced as he pressed his back against the wall. Blood seeped through his fingers where he clutched his shoulder. Camila tore a strip from her already ruined dress and moved toward him. "Let me see it." "There's no time." "Let me see it," she repeated, her voice harder now, steadier. Something had shifted inside her during that chaos. Fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Roberto relented, lowering his hand. The wound was ugly but clean, through and through. She wrapped the fabric tight, her hands surprisingly calm as she worked. "You've done this before," he observed. "Volunteer work at a free clinic. My father thought it looked good for the foundation's image." She pulled the makeshift bandage tight, and Roberto hissed through his teeth. "Turns out some things you learn actually matter." As she tied off the fabric, her eyes caught something on her father's desk. A leather folder, partially open, with the Nevaz Syndicate seal embossed on the cover. Her hands froze. "Camila, don't," Roberto started, but she was already moving, already reaching for the folder. Inside were contracts, dates, transfers of money that made her stomach turn, and a letterhead that made her blood run cold. Duarte Holdings. "No," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she flipped through pages. "No, this can't be right." Roberto's voice was quiet, resigned. "Your father didn't just owe Duarte money. He was Duarte's partner. 5 years ago, they ran operations together. Drug routes through the port of Miami, money laundering through your family's shipping company." Camila shook her head, denial crashing against the evidence in her hands. "Then your father got greedy," Roberto continued, each word deliberate, brutal. "He cut Duarte out of a $20 million deal, took the profit, destroyed the partnership. And when Duarte demanded payment, he offered me," Camila finished, her voice hollow. The room spun. Every childhood memory reframed itself in an instant. Her father's late-night meetings, the business associates who came and went like shadows, the way he'd always kept her isolated, protected, valuable. She wasn't his daughter. She was his insurance policy, his get-out-of-jail-free card, his final bargaining chip. He knew, she breathed, tears spilling freely now. He knew they were coming for me tonight. That's why he planted the story about you being my brother. That's why he sold me to save himself. The folder slipped from her fingers, documents scattering across the Persian rug. Everything she'd believed about her father, his love, his protection, his pride in her, it was all a lie built on a foundation of blood money and broken promises. Roberto moved toward her, his good hand reaching out to steady her as her legs threatened to give way. But he didn't offer empty comfort, didn't tell her it would be okay. Your father is a coward who values money more than blood, and you deserved better than him, better than this life he built on lies. I don't know who I am anymore, Camilla whispered, her entire world collapsing inward. Everything I thought was real. Stop. Roberto gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were fierce, uncompromising. You are not your father's daughter. You are stronger than he ever was. And you will live through this. Do you hear me? She nodded, wiping tears away with the back of her hand. Outside the office, footsteps echoed in the corridor, voices calling in Portuguese, the hunters closing in. Roberto pulled his weapon, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency despite his injured shoulder. Now we run and we fight. Together. The side exit led to the courtyard, a sprawling space of marble fountains and manicured gardens that had always been Camilla's favorite part of the estate. She'd spent summers here as a child, reading beneath the magnolia trees, believing her world was beautiful and safe. Tonight, it became a battlefield. Rain hammered down in sheets, sudden and violent, as if the sky itself was mourning. It hit the stone pathways like bullets, creating a deafening rhythm that drowned out everything else. Within seconds, Camilla was soaked, her emerald dress clinging to her body, her hair plastered to her face. "Keep moving!" Roberto shouted over the storm, pulling her toward the perimeter wall where his men were supposed to be waiting with vehicles. They made it halfway across the courtyard when the real bullets started. Gunfire erupted from the colonnade behind them, sharp cracks cutting through the rain. Marble chips exploded from the fountain beside Camilla's head. Roberto yanked her down behind the stone basin, water spraying over them, mixing with blood from his reopened wound. "How many?" Camilla gasped, her heart hammering. Roberto peered around the fountain, counting. 8, maybe more. Then the courtyard flooded with light, harsh spotlights blazing from every entrance, turning the rain into silver curtains, and through those curtains walked Duarte. He moved with absolute confidence, flanked by armed men in tactical gear. No expensive suit now. This was Duarte the soldier, the hunter, the man who'd built an empire on violence. He stopped in the center of the courtyard, rain streaming down his face, a gun hanging casually at his side. Roberto. His voice carried across the space, amplified somehow, echoing off the walls. "This doesn't have to end in more blood. Give me the girl. Honor the debt. Walk away alive." Roberto rose slowly from behind the fountain, his weapon trained on Duarte, his body positioned squarely between Camilla and the man who wanted to take her. "She's not property," Roberto called back, his voice steady despite the rain, despite the pain. "She's not currency, and she's sure as hell not yours." Duarte laughed, cold, mirthless. Her father signed contracts, made promises. She is payment for his betrayal. That's how our world works, Roberto. You taught me that. I taught you wrong, Roberto said quietly, but loud enough to carry, and I'm correcting that mistake tonight. Camila watched from behind him, rain and tears mixing on her face, as Roberto stood his ground. His shoulder was bleeding through the makeshift bandage. He was outnumbered, outgunned. Any tactical analysis said he should surrender, negotiate, save himself. But he didn't move. You touch her, Roberto said, each word deliberate and final. You go through me. Duarte's expression hardened. Then I go through you. He raised his hand, and his men lifted their weapons in unison, 8 barrels pointed at Roberto, at Camila, at the choice Roberto had made to stand between them. This wasn't business anymore. This wasn't about territory or money or old grudges. This was war. A brother claiming a sister by blood spilled on stone, a man choosing redemption over survival, a monster becoming human because someone finally mattered more than his own life. Camila saw it all in that moment, saw Roberto not as the feared Mafia boss the world knew, but as the man who'd lost everything once and refused to lose again. The man who'd taken a bullet for her, who'd bled for her, who stood now in the rain, wounded and outnumbered because family wasn't about blood or contracts. It was about who stayed when staying meant dying. Roberto, she whispered, gripping his jacket from behind. Don't do this. Don't die for me. He didn't turn, didn't waver. I already died once, the night Isabella didn't come home. This, his grip tightened on his weapon, this is me finally living again. Duarte's smile vanished. So be it. And the courtyard exploded. Gunfire erupted from every direction, a cacophony of violence that shattered the night. Roberto returned fire immediately, his shots precise despite his wounded shoulder. 2 of Duarte's men went down, then 3. But they kept coming. Roberto's weapon clicked empty. He ejected the magazine, reaching for another, but his injured arm slowed him down. Just half a second, but in combat half a second was eternity. Duarte saw his opening. He raised his gun, leveling it directly at Roberto's chest, his finger tightening on the trigger. His eyes blazed with triumph, with years of betrayal finally finding their target. This is for what you took from me, Duarte snarled. Time slowed to a crystalline moment, the kind where every detail becomes impossibly sharp. Camila saw the rain suspended in the air like diamonds, saw Roberto's eyes widen with the realization that he was out of time, saw Duarte's finger completing its pull, and something inside her snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a wire pulled too tight, finally released. Her hand closed around cold metal on the ground, a weapon dropped by one of the fallen men. She didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't calculate odds or consequences. She moved, rising from behind Roberto, rain streaming down her face, her hands wrapped around the gun with surprising steadiness. Every self-defense class her father had insisted she take, for appearances, for propriety, came flooding back. Stance, grip, breath, sight alignment. Duarte's eyes shifted to her, a heartbeat too late. She fired. The gunshot cracked through the storm, louder than the rain, louder than the thunder, louder than every scream of fear she'd swallowed throughout this nightmare. Duarte jerked backward, his weapon falling from his hand, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down at the spreading crimson across his chest, then back at Camila, at this woman he'd hunted, this prey he'd underestimated. Impossible, he whispered. Then he fell. The courtyard plunged into silence so profound it felt unnatural. The remaining gunmen froze, their weapons lowering in confusion and disbelief. The rain continued its relentless drumming, but somehow it seemed quieter now, muted. Camila stood there, weapons still raised, her entire body trembling, but her hands steady. Smoke curled from the barrel, dissipating into the rain. She'd killed a man. Not in self-defense theory, not in hypotheticals. In reality. In blood and bone and finality. Roberto turned to her slowly, his face a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked almost like pride. "Camila, he was going to kill you," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, almost detached. "He was going to take everything away again. I couldn't let him." Her weapon slipped from her fingers, clattering to the wet stone. She looked at her hands, shaking now, stained with rain and gunpowder residue, and realized they belonged to someone different than the woman who'd walked into that ballroom hours ago. That Camila had been sheltered, protected, decorative. This Camila had walked through fire and emerged tempered like steel. Roberto moved toward her, ignoring his wound, ignoring the chaos, ignoring everything except the woman who just saved his life. He pulled her against him, not gently, but grounding, real, the embrace of someone who understood exactly what she'd just become. "You didn't just survive tonight," he said quietly against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "You became something they can never touch again. Something stronger than they ever let you be." Camila pressed her face against his chest, her tears mixing with rain and blood, her body shaking with the weight of transformation. She had been prey. She had been payment. She had been property. But tonight, in rain and gunfire and impossible choices, she'd become something else entirely. A survivor. A fighter. A woman who saved her brother's life. And nothing would ever make her weak again. 6 weeks later, the ocean looked nothing like the violence they'd survived. The cafe sat on a quiet stretch of Miami Beach, far from the mansions and the danger, far from the world that had tried to destroy them both. Salt air mixed with the scent of coffee. Seagulls called overhead, waves rolled in with patient, endless rhythm, the sound of time healing what bullets had torn. Camila arrived first, wearing jeans and a simple white shirt, no emerald gowns, no designer labels, just herself, the woman she'd chosen to be rather than the one she'd been raised to be. Roberto appeared minutes later, walking with a slight favor to his left side where his shoulder was still healing. No expensive suit today, just dark jeans and a leather jacket. He looked younger somehow, lighter, like a weight he'd carried for years had finally been lifted. They didn't embrace, didn't need to. Some bonds ran deeper than gestures. "You look good," Roberto said, settling into the chair across from her. "Rested." "So do you." She smiled, genuine, warm. "The scar?" He touched his shoulder absently. "Badge of honor. Reminds me what matters." They ordered coffee, made small talk about the weather, about nothing important, dancing around what they'd really come to say. Finally, Camila reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped box. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table between them. "I wanted to give you something," she said quietly, "before you disappear back into whatever world you live in now." Roberto looked at the box like it might bite him. "Camila, you don't owe me." "I know." She pushed it toward him. "That's why I want to give it." He unwrapped it slowly, carefully, revealing a simple silver necklace with a small pendant. Engraved on its surface were words in elegant script. "Brother. Not by blood, but by battle." Roberto's jaw tightened. He tried not to react, tried to maintain the mask he'd worn for decades, the untouchable mafia boss who felt nothing, feared nothing, needed nothing, but his eyes betrayed him. They glistened with something raw and honest, something that looked like grief and gratitude and redemption all tangled together. "Isabella would have liked you," he said finally, his voice rough, "would have called you sister without hesitation." "Then I'll carry her memory too," Camilla said softly. "The sister you lost, the brother I found, we're both products of the same kind of salvation." Roberto held the necklace, running his thumb over the engraving. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "A reason to be better than what I was." Camilla's eyes filled with tears. "You gave me my life, and then you gave me the strength to know what to do with it." They sat in silence, watching the waves, understanding that some endings were really beginnings, that family wasn't about blood or names or legal documents. It was about who stayed when staying was impossible, who bled when bleeding mattered, who chose you when the world said you were disposable. Roberto stood finally, fastening the necklace around his neck. It looked foreign against his weathered skin, this symbol of tenderness, of connection, of humanity reclaimed. "If you ever need anything," he started, "I know where to find you, and you know where to find me." He nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "Camilla?" "Yes?" "You're stronger than anyone who ever tried to break you. Don't forget that." She smiled through tears. "I won't, because my brother taught me." Roberto walked away down the beach, his silhouette growing smaller against the endless horizon, and Camilla watched him go, understanding that they were walking separate paths now, but never alone, because on a night of rain and bullets and impossible choices, a bond had been forged that neither time nor distance could ever break. It began with a whisper, "Pretend I'm your brother," and it ended with a truth neither of them had to pretend anymore. If this story reminded you that family is found in the most unexpected places, that courage lives in the smallest moments, and that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never saw coming, like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever found family where you least expected it? Your stories matter. Because sometimes the most dangerous people become our greatest protectors, and sometimes pretending becomes the most honest thing we ever do.